Broadcasting live from Youngville, North Carolina and Ontario, Canada, this is Got Mead Live, a weekly show where Vicky Rowe and AJ Aramutz bring you the mead news, meadery info, and mead-making discussions from all over, talking with mead makers, mead owners, industry mavens, and influencers. This is Got Mead Live, a weekly podcast about mead and the people who love it and where the mead world is going. And now here are your hosts, Got Mead owner Vicky Rowe and mead and wine maker AJ Aramutz.
Live from the den of the puppies of the apocalypse, Bunny Pen in Ottawa, Canada, Melbourne, down under, Ryan's Pad in Denver, and not the TARDIS in Miami because Maddie's got to work tonight. It's Got Mead Live. Welcome to the show. Tonight we've got Ryan Carlson doing pairing your yeast with your mead, part 2, because we probably could have gone on half the night last week, so I decided to kick him into next week. So he has graciously agreed to come back this week, even though he's going fishing tomorrow, and we're gonna just talk about this till we're done. So if y'all got questions, we need you to pop into the chat. You'll find the link on the show page, the episode page for today. You can pop into the chat and ask us. You can ask us on Twitter. You can inbox me on Facebook, or if you want to actually come on, then feel free to give me an inbox with a phone number, and we'll bring you in, and you can talk to Ryan, and you guys can do a case study. So it's all good, it's all wild, and we'll do whatever we need to keep you guys happy. So let us know. We're hoping to get some good questions tonight. So all y'all know we do this because, like you, we're mead crazy. And the thing is, though, is of course that doing this stuff, they unfortunately like to charge. I wish they didn't, but there you go. So it's over $200 a month, and I do appreciate all the folks that have signed up or renewed this week. Thank you so much. Usually get a couple, 3 a week. That is awesome, so amazing. And just want you to consider, if you listen to the show, if you use Got Mead, and you think that it's got value, consider becoming a patron member. It's only $30 a year. It's like 50 cents a week, so no biggie. And that gets you access to the patron boards on the Got Mead forum, as well as our patron Facebook group. And there's award-winning recipes in those groups that you can take advantage of, as well as a lot of very experienced mead makers who will have some really good ideas and suggestions for you. So thank you, and we appreciate not only you coming to listen, but being willing to help support. It's pretty awesome. So if you want to listen live, well, if you're already here, you know how. But otherwise, you can listen to us live if you go to gotmead.com. Just click on Got Mead Live Radio Show, and you'll see a player. You'll also see a list of all of our shows going back to the beginning. So, and you can listen to us there. The player will be live when we are, and it'll show the most recent show when we're not. If you prefer to be mobile or want to listen later, feel free to check us out on Spreaker, iTunes, SoundCloud, TuneIn, and Stitcher. Our shows get posted to all of those locations. Just search Got Mead Live. If you want to find us online, gotmead.com is, of course, the main site. And then on Facebook, we are at facebook.com/gotmead, and the main group is facebook.com/groups/gotmead. Twitter is @gotmeadnow. Feel free to tweet us. I'm usually watching during the show, and I get notices, of course, when we're not. If you want to ask us a question, just go to gotmead.com, put your mouse over Got Mead Live Radio Show. There'll be a drop down where you can get a form where you can send us questions, suggestions for guests, or anything else that you think that we might need to know about the show. So feel free. We want to hear what you think. And if you want to call in, and if Skype is being cooperative, the phone number is 803-443-MEAD. That's 803-443-6323. And if for some reason you don't get picked up, I'm not ignoring you. That means Skype's being a bitch, and we'll have to bring you in another way. So feel free to inbox me some way or another your phone number, and I'll bring you in. So that's not a problem. So guys, what are we drinking?
I got water because reasons. How about you, Ryan?
Oh, I'm just drinking one of the very first decent meads that I made. It's a cherry mel with some Hallertau hops that I tossed in there,
Cool.
and it's tasting pretty good.
Nice. How about you? Hamish, are you unmuted yet? Are you drinking?
I am neither drinking nor unmuted. I am still traveling to my studio for the radio show tonight. When I do get there, I believe I have a bottle of Vessel chili or maybe the bourbon barrel aged one sitting there waiting for me. So that's what I'll be looking at.
Ooh, nice. Well, I apparently am on a bee nectar kick, mainly because we're going to our national black powder shoot tomorrow for the rest of for Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, Sunday. And I was going through the fridge and saw I had all these cans of mead, one of which was Bee Nectar's Cran Raz cider. And the cans, of course, while cool and convenient, also don't keep as well as glass. So I thought, I really need to probably start thinking about drinking these things. So I grabbed that one. The rest of them went out to Lucy the trailer. They're in the fridge there, and they're going with me to the shoot. So with any luck,
Hmm.
and I've got some stuff. I've got what have I got? I've got three braggots from Mike Fall at Rabbit's Foot, and those are giant cans, so I'll have to share those. They're crowlers, and I've got two cans of Sergio's. Peachy Palmer and Half Palmer. So those are going up with
Nice.
me. Yeah. And then another can of Bee Nectar's stuff, and I can't remember which one it is offhand, but so those are all going up with me, and I'm going to share them around and see if people like them. But this one's
I'm
this
sure they
one's
will.
pretty good. And there's all kinds of fruit in the nose, an apple and the cranberries and the raspberries are all mixed up in there. And then when you taste it, it's just this explosion of fruit in your mouth, and it's got a nice creamy mouthfeel to it. It's got lots of body, so I really like it. It's a real easy drinker and terrifyingly easy to drink.
Those are always the fun ones.
Yeah, so we shall see. But all right, so Ryan, the show belongs to you, my friend.
All right. So listen, guys, all you listeners out there, we don't have a whole lot to cover tonight. So tonight would be a great night for you guys to jump in and bring some questions or comments or anything. We want your participation in all of this. So please hook yourselves up however that happens. Do you remember, Vicki, didn't we have Oscar doing Ask Oscar show on the very first night that we had the podcast? Or did he come in a little bit later?
Well, we had Ask Oscar as a recorded segment because Pete Tuesday nights are bad for him because that's the middle of his work week and he works stupidly long hours. But yeah, we had him on right from the beginning.
So I was actually the first person that was doing the Ask Oscar show. And so when you were talking about, doing the podcast and all this, I was thinking back that I was just lucky enough to be the first one that Oscar, worked with some questions. And I was trying to remember if that was the very first show or if we had some shows for a while before we did the Ask Oscar segment.
Well, the Ask Oscar segment was with us from the beginning, but I don't think the one you had was at the very beginning. It was a little ways in. I don't know. I've lost track.
No, I'm positive.
It was the first one?
I'm positive I was the first guy. I remember that very, very succinctly.
Okay, cool. Then kudos.
Like a long time ago and not so long ago, both, huh?
Well,
Really.
It's funny because I just happened to look when I was going in to create the show notes, the show page today. One of the things I do is do a filter in WordPress to just pull up the stuff for Got Me Live. because I just want to get the most recent things so I can copy the relevant bits that go over to the next one, like the chat link and whatnot. And
Right.
tonight's show is 121 shows.
Wow.
Yeah.
Huh, you know what I just saw, and to be honest with you, I thought it was spam. Well, it was spam. Chrissy Zamanpour just spammed her book, but also said that this past week was JD's 100th show. And so that doesn't make sense if they've had 100 shows and we've had 100 shows when Got Mead started long before whatever their programs go.
Well, we take breaks. We take December off.
No, maybe they don't do that, huh?
Yeah,
No.
I don't know
I
what
see.
I don't know what their regular schedule is, but we take breaks, we take December off, and it's just what it is. But
Right.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, I thought it was nice that people were congratulating, because it's
Yeah.
this is really cool because we've got two good shows about mead out there. Well, three, because Mead Makers, and
Mhm.
and I think there's a
But have
couple.
it.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, there's a couple more that are just getting started, which is great. So we're seeing more and more of that, and
Yeah.
I'm liking that a lot. I mean, that says something to me.
Rising tide.
I think didn't Mead Makers take a break for a while?
They did, yeah. One of them had a young child, and the other one got caught up with work. So yeah, it was just life and stuff. Sometimes that happens.
Right. I don't think they're doing it right now, but I could be wrong too.
Yeah, I heard I saw a post that they were fixing to release a new episode, so I'm looking forward to that.
They were fixing.
Hey, now.
Hey, no. So, do we have any questions from anybody yet?
No, people apparently are not awake at the moment, so
No.
no questions right
All right.
now. You were gonna talk
Okay.
about. Oh shoot! I gotta pull up my copy of the book. You were gonna.
Oh, I know. I've got it all here in front of me.
Yeah, the stuff like the Opti Red and the FT Rouge and the FT Berry and that. Because a lot of people were asking about that, and I'm new to that stuff. I haven't played with those yet, so I want to learn too.
Well, and so I started playing with them quite a while ago, and so I do have some good experience with some of them. But what I'm excited about, there's stuff that came out new just of late with the 2018 book, which I haven't actually used yet. I did buy some, and it's sitting in one of those big plastic tubs with a whole bunch of other of my chemicals that nobody wants to ever use. Right? But yeah, there's a lot of really good things, and I really think so. Just to drop back a minute to talk a little bit about again what we talked about last week. I personally feel that the yeast is every bit as much of an ingredient as is any honey varietal that you might use and or any other adjuncts. I mean, it's really quite sad when I see somebody that, they only used, and I understand, I'm not putting anybody down, but it's really sad when somebody's only used the same old yeast every day for every time they've ever made a mead. I think if you just incorporate starting to learn to use different yeast with your meads, that's just going to open up a whole complete world that you never knew even existed. And I think it's really part of becoming a complete mead maker. I personally believe that with every honey, there's, I don't know if there's 3 or 5 or 6 or only 2, but with every honey, there's definitely some yeast that really make that particular honey shine. And there's even way more yeast that doesn't really do that honey a favor at all. In fact, sometimes when I and my good friend Jim Davis first did our 25-gallon, single-gallon batches, I could say out of the 25, we probably had about a third that did real well. we had a third that were so-so, and we had a third that really sucked. And so I think that it's real important to learn your different yeast strains. I was very clear last week, or at least I believe I was, on how to use the book and how to color code all that information. So then once you get a honey, you can figure out if you want to play the spice aspect of it, or the fruit, or the floral, and then that system that I spoke of last week will help you to pick all those things. I just think it's wonderful to get a new honey and then pick 2 or 3 yeasts that you've arrived upon based on the little system that I shared last week, and then do a single gallon of each of those, maybe 2 or 4 or 5, depending on how much honey you bought and how aggressive you want to learn to do this thing. And it really opens up a huge world and will make you a much better mead maker just doing that alone.
Cool.
What about you, AJ? You agree, or are you kind of the mind that you like to just pick a couple and stick with them all the time?
Well, I end up using K1V a lot just because I don't tend to be able to do a lot of temperature control, and
Right.
I have not found that it's ever given me any grief over that. I also like using EC1118 because I have not found that it blows through things like crazy like other people do. Maybe I abuse it too much. I don't know, but I don't find it's been detrimental to my mead making to use that one. I've tried several batches with D47 and they haven't been terrible, but I really, really need to do a bunch of side-by-side batches to actually compare one against the other with the same honey. Because most of the time when I do stuff, I just sort of ask around and try to figure out what everyone else thinks will be best. I don't really know it for myself yet because I haven't gotten my Ursine gear to actually do my yeast testing like I wanted to.
Right.
Even just, do one with sugar water, do one with the honey I always use, do one with the honey I sometimes use. And then, if I come into a lot of honey of another type, I do it again with that too. And, just you gotta see what works best for you. And right now, because I'm kind of lazy and haven't gotten enough stock bottled to get enough carboys back to actually do the experiments, I'm just going with the safe one, which is generally right now these days K1V, because it's really hard to screw that one up.
Well, and it's such a too that's very, very it's a utilitarian yeast. In other words, it can go a lot of different directions and still create really good meads.
Seriously, if I had to give up all my yeasts except for one, that would probably be the one I'd keep.
I think so too. That would be my 71B, I believe. I'm sure that's I bet if you took the next go down 5, so if 71B is number 1, go down to number 6, and I'll bet if you compared how much 71B the store sold versus 6 through 500, 71B would be the winner.
I'd believe that. I'm not sure how popular it is up here.
Yeah.
I would actually have to ask my brew store how much of that they sell.
Mm-hmm.
But
here in Australia, it's EC1118 is definitely the largest imported yeast that the importer brings in. So
is that right?
Quite interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that because when people don't know necessarily what they're talking about, they assume that EC1118 will be fine for mead, and I mean they're generally right. I don't think it does you any harm, unless you let it ferment too hot and too fast. Perhaps that's where, because I don't have cold fermentations, but I also don't really have hot ones either.
Well, it's just the biggest seller. He doesn't know what they use it for. Not necessarily for mead, but because a lot of the winemakers use it, so it's definitely the most readily available yeast over here.
Yeah, and it's fairly common here too. Like if the guys don't know what to suggest, that's what they'll suggest because it'll blow through just about anything eventually.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. One of the reasons why you find that in all of the wine kits, and in fact most of the wine kits, even today, I think, they tell you just to sprinkle the yeast right on top of your must.
Yep, exactly.
And
I did that for years, specifically because all the wine kits that I'd ever bought told me to do that, despite the fact that the packet said otherwise.
Right. Well, the reason that they picked that, I actually read that EC and K1V both are the only two yeasts that, for whatever reason, it doesn't seem to harm them to just pitch right on top of your must.
Huh.
And as you know, both of those yeasts are so total workhorses. They're like nurses. You can't kill them. After the apocalypse, there'll be nurses in EC 1118.
Yep.
And cockroaches.
And cockroaches.
Don't forget the cockroaches. Yeah.
That's right.
And
That'll
fruit
be
flies.
the only three things left after the nuclear fallout.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why they always use that yeast, because they want to make sure that they don't want people calling up and having stuck batches and all of that. And that yeast is just like,
Yeah.
It's radioactive. It doesn't stop.
Yeah, the only time I've ever had stuck batches with that was when I failed to read the label on my Welch's raspberry concentrate and realized it had either sodium benzoate or potassium sorbate. It had something in it that inhibited it, and I actually did have one packet once of EC1118 that did not start. I split it up and put it into two batches I was doing on the same day, and neither of them started.
Right.
I split it. I was rehydrating at the time, and it just looks wrong when it just sinks to the bottom and doesn't start making any foam. And I'd done it in two different batches. I just same packet, same day, and two different batches with the same packet, and it just didn't start the first time. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe the water is too hot, and I scalded it. I think I'm careful about these, but maybe not. But no, the rest of that packet wouldn't go either. So it wasn't just me. I actually did get one dud packet, but that is out of all of the batches I've ever made, and there've been a couple hundred. That's the only dud packet I've ever had of yeast.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue. I'm going to give away some of my secrets tonight that I've only shared with my closest inner circle, but I'm just going to give them away tonight to everybody. One of the ways that I found to rehydrate my yeast and know for sure that it's alive and doing well before I even pitch it is this. Most of the time when I see pictures on the internet of other people rehydrating their yeast, I think every time I've ever seen it, they're generally in a narrow, in other words, the circumference isn't very big, but it's a small cylinder and it's very deep. Those glass 2-cup measuring glasses that a lot of people have. I think people rehydrate an awful lot in that.
That is exactly what
That's what I use.
Yeah. So I'm going to tell you what I do differently, and I'm absolutely certain. And I shared this on Got Mead for a while, and people were like, "What the hell are you talking about?" And then it dawned on me why they weren't seeing what I was seeing. So I'm going to tell you what I do. Rather than rehydrating my yeast in a small cylinder that's very deep, I like to use a big glass, like a casserole dish. Or if I'm making a big batch, let's say I'm using 30 grams of yeast, I like to use a large, what's the name of it? Oh, a Corningware dish. And it's probably like 14 inches across. It's a big, huge pie pan kind of deal.
Oh, okay.
Now, what I do that I like the water to stay as warm as it can for as long as it can. And what I found is that if I pour my hot water that I've been boiling on the stove into those dishes, the temperature starts to drop rather quickly. And once it kind of starts to really slow down, you can pitch at 104, which is what they recommend for all the yeast strains. And in very short order, it blows right past that 104 and gets cold rather quickly. I like them, if I had my way about things, I would like them to sit in 104 degree water for half an hour. So one of the things I do is is I measure my yeast, because usually I buy like larger packets, either 500 grams or 80 grams. So I actually measure my yeast. I measure my GoFirm in another little glass container. I measure the amount of water that I'm going to use, or at least I know I will measure it, and then I'll look and see, how many milliliters it is, so I know for sure what the exact volume is. I'll boil some water, and then I'll pour it in my big flat dish long enough that I'm warming up that dish. So it's at 120 or 30 or whatever my temperature is. And so I'll pour the actual proper amount of water that I want into my dish, but my dish is very warm, and my water is probably less than a half an inch thick. So now I'm very, very precise when I sprinkle my yeast out on there, that I try to make it very even and as thin as I can. And so I usually go back and forth, left and right, and then up and down in my dish. And I don't ever want to stir that yeast. In fact, that's originally why I went to this bigger vessel, is because I got tired of sitting there twirling around with the fork or with the whisker, smashing the hell out of my baby yeast. And so I've started to sprinkle them out, and they get wet right away, and they sink down to the bottom. And so even if you're making a lot of yeast, you sprinkle it on there left and right, and then go up and down. And if you just wait for a minute or two, it eventually gets wet enough that it drops down underneath the surface, and now I can put layer number 2 of my dry yeast on top. So I never have to stir it. I just let it naturally, all on its own accord, float down to the bottom. Now, here's how I, quote, proof my yeast so that I know that it's actually working. Within minutes, if you look in the tray, and you won't see it here's what I learned talking to my friends on Got Mead, that everybody's going, I don't know what the hell you're on, Ryan, but I don't ever see this. And it's because you won't see it in a deep vessel. But if you're shallow enough, you can look there and you can see. I like to say I'm looking at ants having a 4th of July picnic, and I'm seeing all of the firecrackers from the ground coming up to the top of the water and exploding. I know that sounds weird, but if you guys will do what I'm talking about, I promise you'll see it.
Well, because I'm using one packet in a 2-cup measuring cup, or actually sometimes less than that, and I also sprinkle very evenly. I do get something similar, because a 1/4 cup, I don't use GoFirm yet, so a 1/4 cup is really not that deep in a 2-cup measure.
Oh, sure. Okay, so perfect. You're confirming what I'm saying.
I know what you're talking about. You're not crazy.
Well, I kept telling my friends on Got Mead about this, and they're like, you're crazy. I don't ever see this stuff. And then it dawned on me, I'm actually pitching my yeast, rehydrating my yeast in very thin water, and so I can see all this activity. Or it also looks like cauliflowers are blossoming and 3 times faster than you might watch, the time-released pictures where you see a rose open up and blossom. It kind of looks like that, only it's cauliflower heads.
Yeah, I've also seen that in doing bread yeast in a big dish too.
Okay, sure. So that's how I proof my yeast. So I know for sure before I ever pitch that I have good viable yeast. Now, another thing that I oftentimes do, we've talked about in the past, that the manufacturer actually gut loads these yeasts so that when they're dry and you pitch them into your water, and hopefully we're all using GoFirm, it makes a huge, huge, huge difference. I promise. It's well worth the money. They have a half an hour worth of food that was left in their bellies when they were dried out, and so they can stay in your slurry for a half an hour before they start to get hungry and need some food. Well, now if we pitched in our GoFirm, we've already they were brought back to life already in a bath of food. So now, just with the GoFirm alone, we can no longer feel the need to have to pitch within a half an hour. Now, for those of you that are just pitching in warm water, and please don't pitch into. People use all kinds of things that think, oh, well, I should pitch in sugar water or must, or I'll give them nutrients. Well, the fact of the matter is anything that has DAP in it is toxic to the yeast before they establish their cell membrane. And so we're actually poisoning our yeast by bringing them back to life in anything with inorganic nutrients in it. So if you're rehydrating in plain water, you do need to put something in there to go give those guys some food within 30 minutes. What I generally do, now think of my big flat thin vessel that I've never had to touch my yeast. They all got wet, all happied out, and they sunk, and then they started going off and having the big party. I wait for about 20 to 25 minutes, and then I start what I call acclimating or temperating the yeast. And so now I'm actually I use big turkey basters, the squeezy handle on the top of a long cylinder. And so I'll grab some of my must with my turkey baster and I'll bring it over and I'll squirt it in my pan. Or sometimes I'll just squeeze a little bit of honey in there. I won't stir it up because I don't want to give them an immediate big boost of gravity change. And so if I am adding honey, I just sprinkle it in there. It sits on the bottom and they start to eat it off the bottom. So I haven't really changed much of the gravity. But one of the things that I really like when we temperate is as we slowly bring on board more and more of our must, we're slowly allowing them to get used to a whole bunch of things. We've talked about the temperature shock. So if we slowly bring must in, we're not shocking them with our temperatures. They're also getting used to the pH, which is going to change. The more of your must that you bring on, the more it's going to adjust to the pH that the must is. We're also allowing them to slowly get used to the gravity. Imagine in the slurry, the gravity might be 1005, and we're going to be dumping these guys eventually into 1150, 1160 on a big mead. That's a huge change, and so we want to slowly bring them from the place that's very mellow and not very intrusive. We want to get them used to over time where they're going to end up living the rest of their life. And so when we eventually dump them into our vessel, we've already got them to that place in our slurry before we toss them into the must. And so that's my trick to temperate, and that's also how I can always proof that my yeast are alive before I even pitch. Now, here's something that seems... No, I'm sorry. Go ahead, AJ.
I was going to say it's a really good way to make sure your yeast is working. The first time I started actually rehydrating like a sensible person, I realized that this is how you know whether your yeast is working.
Yeah. Now, this seems quite common sense to me, but I see this happen a lot of times. People get on and they say, boy, I pitched my yeast 5 days ago and I fed it 3 times and still nothing's going on. I would strongly encourage everybody to please, if you know that you're going to use a particular yeast, have enough of that yeast that if for some reason it doesn't get off, you can go back and repitch another of that same yeast. And don't wait for days before you think that something's wrong. I don't think if I pitch something and I'm still not seeing proof within 6 hours or 8 at the most, I'm going to be concerned. I'm going to start going, something's not right here.
Well, I'll go as long as 20. I'll go as long as 48 hours because generally that I've got enough time before things start going funky on me.
Yeah.
But yeah, like if I'm not starting to see any kind of either airlock activity or specific gravity drop, then yeah, I will repitch at 48 hours if nothing else is happening.
Yeah. See, I because I pitch with quite a bit of.
Yeah, you pitch with Go Firm, so that's probably going to that'll change the rules for me when I start using it.
Well, sure, and then I also saturate with pure O2 in a centered stone, and so that makes a huge difference too. I think for the most part, though, a bigger cell count will get you through the lag phase much quicker. And so I'm really accustomed to a lot of times I'll pitch in the afternoon and I'll continue to temperate for a couple hours or more. In other words, I've never been able to find out exactly from a scientist that specifically knows in a mead must, but the best that I can tell from the homework that I've done is that I like to think that for the most part, and it's strain specific and the different musts will change a little bit, but I think that every 90 minutes we have a budding process where every 90 minutes we have a complete new generation of daughter cells coming on board.
Yeah, I think 90 minutes doubling time is about what I found in my research too.
Right. So a lot of times I'll actually let my yeast have a couple generations of life in my Cornwall or what's in my big dish, my slurry dish, before I'll pitch it into my must. In fact, sometimes I don't even make my must for 2 or 3 hours after I made a little small batch of must to rehydrate and to make my slurry going. So in essence, when I actually toss it in my mead, I'm kind of tossing in a starter because I've allowed everything to sit. Imagine this: if mama has a baby's born in our Go Firm slurry too. So I like to be able to, when we pitch it 4 times 10 to the 6th, which is I think 50 million cells per whatever little measurement they use. Anyway, it's absolutely mind-boggling when we realize when we look at a logarithmic growth, how fast our stuff reproduces. And so if you just leave it on the counter for 3 or 4 hours, 5 hours, you're in essence pitching 3 or 4 times the amount of cells that you actually rehydrated. That's another way then to make our lag phase very short, because we're pitching in a huge cell mass at that point in time. Now, from the time that we mix our must until we actually see proof that our yeast has gone out of lag phase into the growth phase, that whole time we have bad guys in our must. Even if we're really careful, we still have bad guys in our must eating food. If you threw the food in there, and if you oxygenated, they're sucking up all the oxygen as well. And so it's really not a good idea to pitch any food into your must until you actually see proof of fermentation. And as soon as you see that, then that's a sign for your first feeding. Mm-hmm. But you don't have to be alarmed and, I got to feed them right now because they just moved out of lag, because they've got they have at least some yan to move forward. And actually with wines, the reason that it says to feed at the 1/3 sugar break is most of the time there's enough yan in grape juice that they can get to this first third sugar break on their own without needing any food, because it's on board naturally in the grape must. And so depending on what we're making in our mead, oftentimes we have enough yan in there that we don't really have to worry about. In other words, if you expect they're going to move out of the lag phase into the growth phase while you're at work, they can wait until you get home to feed them. Or if you're afraid they're going to come out of lag at night time, they'll be fine in the morning, or even go to work and come back and feed them that night when you get home from work. So that's the rehydration process. It's really the first place, our first place where we make the difference is when we're figuring out and we're building our mead on a piece of paper in our heads, and we're making our mead specifically with every piece involved there for a reason. Our yeast choice is the first place that we really get to pick up a color out of our color wheel and start to paint with the color. And our rehydration process and our temperation is really, that's huge. That's the first place that we can screw up, or it's the first place where we can give our yeast a super huge advantage, and we can turn them into supermen and set them up so that they can just cruise to the end of the ferment without making any off flavors and without getting stuck fermentations and all of that. So it's important to do it right. Almost any time that I see somebody saying that they've got a stall, that they got stuck, generally it goes back to somehow they didn't do the rehydration process correctly.
Yeah,
So
that said, like, yeast are pretty hardy, and I didn't rehydrate for years, and I still got some pretty good meads. But if you know better, there's really no good reason not to give your yeast the best chance you can.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
There's a lot of people who are like, well, it works just fine. Yeah, but we know better now, so you really should think about updating your methods.
That's right. That's right. And where you're going to really see the difference is at the end of the fermentation, when things are really starting to get hard for the yeast and they're becoming more and more, their environment is becoming more yeast unfriendly and it's becoming toxic and all of that. What we do in the front end really sets them up to be able to endure in that last part without having big problems. And so, some people say, well, I don't aerate with oxygen and I don't think I have to. You're probably right.
But if you can do this well, doing what you're doing, then, imagine how much better it could be if you could give it oxygen.
That's right. And one of the things, I've only been making mead for about 4 years, and I've learned quite a lot just because that's my nature to study, all on my own old-fashioned way, like we used to in books and all of that. But I'm at a place now where I'm rising, closer to the top of the best guys that make mead, and I'm sitting there wondering, what do I have to do different to be able to kind of move in where I'm shoulder to shoulder with these guys instead of standing on the next tier down. And I kind of think at this point I do a whole lot of things right, but I wonder if it's just the marginal gains that you get from just a little tiny bit better from this and a little tiny bit better over there and a little bit better understanding here. And I think that as we progress and get better, well, it's true in anything, the closer you get to pure, the harder it is to make advances, right? I mean, here's an example. You take a golfer that shoots 120, you can bring that golfer up to shooting 110 or 100 fairly simply because he's got an awful lot of gross mistakes. But then if you get a golfer that's shooting in the 80s, to move from 80 to 75 as a handicap is as big as moving from 120 to 100 or even more. And then go from 75 down to 74 is probably as big as it was to going from 80 to 75. And so I think and I hope, and here's where I'm looking at, is I have a few things that I know I can do better. I can be completely anal about sanitation, and I'm real good about it in the beginning, but I think that at the end of the day, I can test my SO2 and play that game a little bit tighter, and it's not uncommon for me to take my turkey baster on certain days and dip in and get a taste out of one carboy and just move over to the next carboy, and I'm counting on the alcohol, and I'm counting on my SO2 that's already in there to keep everything clean. But maybe that little smudge degrades things over time. I don't know, but it's just something to think about. I know for sure that as we start to learn and understand about all these different additives that we're going to talk about next, I'm quite certain that as we learn how to employ those properly, I think that's a whole nother level of moving up higher on the ladder of our mead making. Any questions yet?
We got one so far.
Nice.
They're all over on chat talking about other things.
Fireworks. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Randy Guest put this up. It was his first post on the Got Mead group, as a matter of fact, and he says, I'm about to start a small batch of mead with this awesome blueberry honey. And he wants to make a sweet mead that'll be a 1 gallon batch. He has 2 kilograms, or about 4 pounds of honey. And he was thinking about using K1V1116 or 71B1122. What do you think?
Out of those two, I would use K1B. If you can be patient and order something and or buy something at the shop, I think QA23 would be a better choice. And also, if you have temperature control, and this is important, if you can keep your yeast between 60 and 64 or 5, which I think almost always requires a good temperature controlling, however you want to do it, D47 would also make that a great yeast. Or a great yeast for that mead. I've made a lot of traditionals with that particular honey, and I just think it's absolutely fabulous. But out of your two choices that you have, Randy, I would use the K1B.
Now, he was thinking about using those two. Do you have other recommendations?
Sure. QA23. And if you can control the temperature, D47. To my knowledge, D47 is the crankiest yeast on the planet. And they say it's good up to 66 degrees. I'm afraid to even get to 65. So I like to keep it, most of the time I like to keep it at the bottom 30% of the temperature range. But with D47, I really like to keep it at 62 degrees. I have a unit that I've got a conical fermenter with temperature control, and so I can just dial that into 62 and leave it there.
Okay, I'll give you that it's probably the most whiny about temperature, but I think our C212 is probably the most whiny about nutrients.
About food, yep. I agree. You could also use, there's a product called Opti White. So we'll move forward. I hope that answers your question, Randy. If not, you can type on your keyboard and ask some more. I'm going to now share some of my other secrets that I don't generally share with too many people. We can do a whole lot of things to change the perception of a mead without really changing some of the quantified numbers, the numerics that we would measure with tools. Now, what I mean by that is if you've made low ABV meads, generally they don't have very much volume because here are the things that create volume: residual sugar, alcohol. There's different yeast strains that will create more polysaccharides and manoproteins than others. And so remember we talked about last week in our book, we have some kind of a marking that will tell us exactly which yeast strains will add mouthfeel. We also have some additional things we'll talk about here shortly that will increase mouthfeel as well. But one of the things that we can do, and I guess this will work in any dry mead that you want to make dry, I can take, and I have taken, and I do this all the time, if I'm going to make a dry mead, either just drink or in a competition, one of the things that I would like to do, I mean, what's wrong with dry meads, right? They don't have any body, and they're usually very low on aromatics. So I'll pick a yeast, number one, that'll give me some mouthfeel. I will also make it sweeter than dry. So let's just arbitrarily pick 10 and 20 just for grins to have a number to play with. By adding oak or tannins, not all tannins are oak, but oak does more than just add tannins, and it's a really great thing to work with. And actually, the very first podcast I ever was able to teach on Got Mead was about oak. So for those of you that are wanting to learn about oak, you'll have to go back to about June, July, August, about September of last year, and there's a podcast on oaking. But you can also use gall tannins. You can use wine tannins. You can use all kinds of different tannins. I know a friend of mine who picks maple leaves out of a maple tree and will age maple leaves in his mead to get some tannic effect. But in any case, now imagine if you've got something that's 10-20, it's got some residual sugar left behind, right? So now you have a bigger nose. You can smell the honey better. It has a lot more body because there's 20 points of sugar in it, yet by using oaks or using tannins, I can push the perception to drier. And so I have meads that would measure on my hydrometer in the 10-20s, that if you drink it, you would guess that it's less than 10.05. And so what we've done is we've tricked the mouth and the nose by changing the perception, even though we didn't change any of the hardwired metrics that we could measure. We can also do the same if you wanted to make a very dry mead, but you wanted it to present sweeter. There's ingredients that we're going to talk about here shortly. I just recently made a Tupelo trad. I burned it completely dry with D21. I like that honey. It wouldn't be my first choice. Wouldn't be my first choice for my Tupelo honey, but I wanted to try it anyway because that particular strain, in my opinion, generally supports the honey part of a traditional quite nicely. And so I used that and I made it very dry, and then I added some Opti White to it, and it made it super sweet. Well, not super sweet, but it actually made it sweeter than I wanted it to, even though it's absolutely bone dry. And so again, by using these additional adjuncts that we can add to our meads, we can dry things out. We can make them perceived to be sweeter. There's a lot of different things that we can add that will increase the aromatic value of that particular mead, and there's also things that will give stuff tannic structure that aren't actually adding tannins. For instance, D21, we don't bring any additional tannins to the show, but D21 in and of itself will give it some tannic structure because of something that that particular yeast strain does. I don't understand or know exactly what it is, but it will definitely make things seem like you've done a tannin addition. So let's think about this for a minute. I'm sure you guys can think of different fruits that when they're fermented, they're kind of fat, aren't they? Imagine if you picked a yeast strain, and DV10 comes to my mind right away. Some of the yeast strains will actually add some acidic value to the mead. And I can't say for positive, but I don't think it changes the pH value or the TA value of your mead. So it's a trick on the tongue. So if you think about something that I go, okay, well, when this is done, it's going to be fat and flabby, and it's probably going to need some acid additions. When I think of a particular fruit that I'm going to use that would be like that, I immediately go to DV10 because that'll kind of pull it in the opposite direction. Some of the yeast strains will give us if you talk about minerality in a wine, that's been one of the gripes that I've had about making mead, is it's been pretty hard to get any presence of minerality in a mead. And now we're starting to find, I think that the manufacturers are really doing a good job of starting to bring to the table these different adjuncts that give us a whole lot of different ways that we can play these ingredients to kind of manipulate these things. In the same way, and I'm sure you must know this, that if something's very acidic and sharp, and maybe comes across too tannic, if that happens to be malic acid, of course, we all know that 71B chews the malic acid down, I think, by about 30%. And so that's a good mead. That's a good yeast strain for something that you know is going to be very tart and tannic and acidic, if in fact it's malic acid. I don't know. To be honest, I don't know a whole lot about the different fruits that have malic acid in them, but if I was going to make something out of cranberries, I would look to see if cranberries have malic acid in them, because usually cranberries are a little bit over the top. They're too tart. What else? Currants, black currants, red currants.
I do find red currants, I find if I use more than about 3 pounds per gallon, I do have to adjust the acidity downwards because I have to raise the pH, because otherwise my RC212 gets really pissy. You think it's pissy about not getting enough nutrients, try getting it too acidic. It gets really, really pissy.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
Absolute whiny pants.
Well, according to the studies, cranberry does indeed have quite a bit of malic acid, second only to lime and apple.
Okay.
Followed closely by red grape, and then there's a big drop when you get to red raspberry, peaches, lemons, pineapples, passion fruit, watermelon. Watermelon, who knew? Oddly enough, grapefruits are all the way at the bottom, which is kind of strange. I would have thought they'd be higher up, but they're not. So.
No, they've got other acids.
Yes, they do.
Yep.
It'll have citric acid rather than. It'll have citric acid, I'm guessing, more than malic.
That's right. So you see, if we think about what we're doing before we actually get started, there's several things that we can do to direct a mead in a particular direction that we can help it from the very start. And then, of course, I feel that I kind of feel like making mead really starts to take place in a real way after the fermentation is over. To be honest with you, I think that the difference between a good mead and a great mead, some of it is certainly how we set it up in the process of the fermentation, the yeast strains that we use, and some of these adjuncts that we're going to talk about in just a couple minutes. But I think we really turn those into great meads once they're done fermenting, and now we start playing with different additions. And that's kind of the art piece. We actually, making mead, we have some very solid science that we follow. We also have kind of an art piece, which I think people that are good cooks, people that understand flavor, people that aren't bound up or constipated in their creativity, I think that those types of people can maybe do this a little more fluently than other types that are maybe not quite as free to express themselves or to think outside of a rigid box, so to speak. So I guess it's time to move on to then our additions.
We do have one question on the yeast strains from Joe Vinciguerra. He
Oh,
asked,
hi, Joe.
yeah, he's on the chat too. He asked, why QA 23 or D? More of a kind of open-ended thing.
Well, let's go back into our book and let's look up QA23 and look up D47. I'm doing that right now, so just give me a minute. So if we look up QA23, so it says, so this probably won't make it, I guess I've learned this from actually using it quite a lot instead of what I'm going to read to you right now, but it says, Lalvin QA23 has a low nutrient and oxygen requirement. It's also known to ferment juice at low temps to dryness. Excellent thiol converter, making it a complementary yeast to developing varietal Sauvignon Blanc passion fruit characters. That particular honey actually does have some of that passion fruit type of character built into the honey itself. And then it also says it produces large amounts of enzyme beta-glucanase during the growth, which allows the release of bound terpenes in aromatic varieties. And so I guess I picked that one because I knew that it would really... Two of the things that contribute to aroma is thiols and esters. Certain things that we add can reveal, kind of like uncover the esters. So they have to be in the must to begin with, or in the honey, but we can reveal it. We can peel back some layers of stuff that will make it more predominant. And then thiols are kind of the opposite of that. Yeah, see, now we're talking about things that I sort of mostly understand in my mind, but I don't know for sure how to teach it. So, Joe, that's just I just know because I've made that particular honey before that that's a good yeast for that particular varietal of honey. The K1V is a very clean yeast for the most part, but it also has some esters, and those esters kind of match up and pair well with the blueberry notes that you get from that varietal. You know, most of the varietal honeys, they don't very often really smell or taste too much like where they come from. I would, in my opinion, blueberry blossom honey is the honey that tastes the most like the plant that it comes from. And so I like those two choices because I like big, thick, voluptuous meads, and both of those will give you mouthfeel. And they both will help to express the blueberry portion of the blueberry blossom. I wish I could help you more than that, but I'm running out of words.
Well, the fact that you've used that honey before is a pretty good indication that you know what's in it and what you might want to highlight. Because somebody who's never used the honey before and doesn't know what's in it might not have an idea what they should be looking for.
Right. I've actually probably made, I think I've probably made about 4 batches with different yeast to kind of really play around a little bit to find out which one really makes that particular honey varietal pop. And so those were the first 2 that came to my mind just because I know they worked well in the past. we can't always, so that's one point I wanted to make about all of these things that we read in our book. They talk about, well, it'll do this, it'll add this particular nose, it'll contribute to this particular fruit or flavor or spice. Some of those they get because of the interaction with the different grapes. Keep in mind, all of these are talking about this is what you get when you make a particular wine with it. And as we know, there's hundreds of different grape species. So not all of what we read about will actually produce those particular notes. Some of them require the grape juice and the molecular makeup in the grape juice to bring about the things that it says it will do. And then some of those other things, they're not reliant necessarily on the grape juice. And so we kind of have to read all of these descriptions of what we're going to get either through a yeast strain or through an additive with a little bit of a grain of salt, because all of these are saying this is what it does when you're making wine with them.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you're going to nail it, and what they say is pretty much going to come true even with making a mead, and then other times maybe not so much. And that's just something you're going to have to play with. I think if you really truly wanted to know how much different it made, and I'll be honest right here, a lot of these things I've used, but I haven't used them in an A-B batch where I could compare very directly one without the adjunct versus one with the adjunct. And so many times the results that I've had from these, I'm kind of relying on past experience or just a notion, if you will, or your gut feeling. So some of these things I can I get this or that, but I can't really specifically tell you in a huge black and white way of how much different it is by using them and or not.
Well, I can tell you from experience that you do in fact get esters with K1V and apples if you have the right conditions.
Oh, for sure. When I first started using K1V, I didn't like that yeast because I did not like the esters. But then I found that later those esters kind of fold back into the mix, and they're very nice. And like we said earlier, that's kind of one of my, if I had to go to yeast strain, that would be one of them for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So here's another thing that I do. We can add volume to a hydromill by picking a yeast strain that will create the manoproteins and the polysaccharides. And so you'll have to look for your little sign that you're going to make. You might want to put the Rolling Stones lips on there, and that would tell you then on anytime you see that it gives a big mouthfeel. But then there's also these different adjuncts that we can add that will increase the mouthfeel. And so you always want to look to try to do that. Generally, the lesser, the smaller a mead is, generally it needs help with the mouth and it needs help with the nose. On the other end, a very high ABV mead, there's ways that we can roll off some of the alcohol heat almost right away. Well, in fact, Vicki, my Mango Man that you drank, you had no idea when you were drinking that was 18% until you started getting stupid.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, had the clue. I mean, you could not tell. It was such an easy drinker and so mellow. I mean, there was absolutely no indication of the alcohol level on that. None.
And they are the best ones.
Yeah, I know better now, though. Anything Ryan hands me, my first question is going to be, and the ABV is what?
Well, so I think I almost always start at 11:20 and go up from there unless I'm making a hydromill. So one of the things that if sometimes we have a hot mead, I know this for sure, without a doubt. If it's hot because it's alcohol, and not good alcohol will taste. It has a taste, a flavor to it, and oftentimes a defined palate will say that a good clean alcohol has some built-in sweetness to it. But if you use a product called Booster Blanc, there's another one called Nobilis or another one called Opti Red. All three of those will round off the bite, that edge from the alcohol. And so I can take an 18% mead, either adding those particular products. Normally, well, so you use the Booster Blanc if it's in a white, and you use Opti Red if it's in a red mead. Both of those will round off the alcohol heat, or if you have maybe a little bit of heat from fusel alcohols, which hopefully by now everybody's got that under control fairly well. It's not that hard anymore, I don't think, for most people, if they spend a little bit of time to learn to make meads without any heat due to fusels and off flavors. But in any case, you can use those two additions to roll off your alcohol heat, and I think it'll also work to some degree with the fusel alcohols, although it won't change, I don't think, the flavor of the alcohol. It will just make it kind of smooth. It'll smooth off the edges and kind of make it rounder. If we want to increase aromatics, we're going to use a product called Optimum White or Opti White. So I'm going to read down through. I have a few notes. Here are a few yeast strains that will give you a boost in aromatics. Back to QA23 and K1V, and also VIN or VIN13. And W15 will also, all of those will boost aromatics. And there's many more, but those were ones that just came to my mind right away when I was starting to think about aromatics. But for sure, if you use the Optimum White or the Opti White, those will help as well. So we're talking some more about aromatics. There's a product called Booster Blanc and Booster Rouge. Of course, one is for white and the other one is for red, right? Blanc is white and Rouge is red. The Booster Blanc will smooth out the mid-palate intensity, so it'll make it kind of round and not as edgy. And it will increase your fruit aromas. And you usually want to add that. Some of these we add at the beginning of the fermentation, and others we add in the aging process. Eventually, some you will get to, once you get to know them and know how much to use, because you've done bench trials, you'll add them in probably right before you bottle. But don't do that unless you already know for sure what you're going to end up with later down the road. So with the Booster Blanc and the Booster Rouge, we add these at the end. They work very well to increase aromatics and volume. And actually the Booster Rouge will roll off some of the alcohol and it'll help it integrate back into the mead quicker. There's a product called Nobilis or Noblesse. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. That'll actually add some sweetness. It says that it intensifies fruit perception and it also rolls off the alcohol heat. So some, as you can see, many of these will do the same function. Now we're moving on to things that either will add more mouthfeel or aromatics. I've got here that Optimum Red will give you more mouthfeel and less astringency. So it's working to diminish the tannins and give you a rounder mouth, more weight on the mouth. And Opti White will give you more aromatics. And the Opti Red will save your colors, and so it works with the polyphenols from the fruits, and it will smooth out your tannins. The Opti-White helps with adding a Lee's aged piece to it when you add it at the end, and it also protects from browning and will protect your aromas. And now this is important for you guys that have family members or you yourself think that you're sensitive to SO2. By using the Opti-White, don't know the function and how it works, but by using that, you can actually use less SO2. So that's a great product to learn and understand how to use if you have yourself or loved ones that seem to be sensitive with SO2, because you can use less. Then we go on to FT Blanc, which is actually a tannin, and it'll help to protect your mead from oxidation. I really struggled a lot with oxidation when I first started making meads. Not in as much as that I had oxidation, but you keep reading all this stuff about people worried about oxidation, and I never had any problems. Mm-hmm. To the point that I didn't even think it was really an issue. I think that in part, the beer world brings into the mead world certain issues that you have in making beer, but they don't hold true in mead. And I think the wine world also brought across the table some of the wine issues into making mead that don't necessarily pertain to mead making.
Yeah, I have made wine and I have oxidized it, but it takes a lot more work to oxidize a mead.
Absolutely. I oxidized a Cab Sauv once with almost it oxidized very easily. Let's put it like that. I ruined it. And all I did was I like to use my power drill and a leaster to that I was oxygenating my must that way before I bought a centered stone. And also degassing, and I didn't do very much. I did less, knowing that it was a wine, and I did less, and I still burnt the hell out of it, oxidation-wise. But what I did learn about a year ago is that alcohol itself, ethanol, will actually oxidize. So I used to be of the mind that, you don't have to worry about any of that because you can't oxidize meat. It just doesn't happen. I'd say for the most part, that's fairly true enough that we don't have to be paranoid and walk on eggshells when we're considering oxidation. I think hopefully here's one of those marginal gain pieces. I think most people don't use SO2 like they can or should or would if they understood it better. So it's not a one-time ad when you're stabilizing your meat and you're good for the rest of its life. I've got an analyzer that I can measure my SO2, and I've found that I'm just kind of winging and guessing it off the top of my mind, but I think about maybe 30% of the SO2 that you add when you stabilize gets bound in the first 24 hours. And so even though we're adding, quote, 50 parts per million, the next day you're probably only at 30 or 35 parts per million. And then if you continue to rack it or open it up to taste it, or you're adding this or that and pulling out bags with adjuncts in it, every time you disrupt that in any fashion, you're losing SO2. And I really think from listening to the guys that I admire and want to become more like, I think they're more particular about managing their SO2 tighter than I do. And that's one place that I'm going to start really getting anal about. So anyway, the FT Blanc will help with oxidation. The FT Blanc Soft will actually help with the oxidation and give you more mouthfeel. The FT Blanc Citrus will promote fruity aromas and citrus type aromas. And then there's another tannin called Radiance. This is brand new. I'm excited to buy this and try this. It says that it unmasks and refines aromas and flavors of fruit. So imagine if you have some fruits that you would like to have a stronger fruit nose and or more fruit in the mouth. The Radiance claims that it'll do that, and it'll also add vanilla, coconut, and caramel. That's a brand new product that they have, and that really struck my interest when I looked at that last week when I was digging through the book.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that's kind of like a modge-podge of just a bunch of different things. The thing is, you have access to your book. Either you have it on your computer, or you can call and ask these guys, and they'll send you one for free. In fact, they also have a cider booklet that they'll send if you call and ask them, and they'll send both of them to you for free. So anyway, without going specifically into all these, I've used quite a bit of them, and I think that for the most part they do what they say they're going to do. I have also learned that you can use a little bit or you can use a lot, and I've kind of stepped into it using the little bit, and I've started to learn to move with some of them to the full dose instead of the minimum dose. And I've found that there's a pretty significant difference with as you might expect, with the full dose than there is with the smaller dose. And then, of course, with all of them, you can add them in up front, and they'll do one thing different than if you add them in on the backside. So I don't really know how to teach you about those particular things anymore. Specifically, it's kind of a thing where you need to read about it and think of how it might work in your advantage, and then pick the one that best makes sense. Or, several of them will work in a whole bunch of meads, right? I mean, some of them are made for white meads, and the others are made for red meads. And so, even though I named quite a few different things, I think that you could probably get by, at least to start with, maybe one or two for your reds, maybe one for mouthfeel, another for aromatics, the same for the whites. And then keep in mind, you can make something that's too sweet, less sweet, and you can make things that are too dry, sweeter.
The perception of sweetness is always an interesting thing, because going back to using red currants, I find even when my specific gravity is down below 1, there's still this nice fruity perception that you've got something sweet, even though it is dry.
Right.
And I found one or two other fruits that do that. I think blackberries are one, and I think starfruit's another.
Yeah. I know just with this most recent batch of Tupelo that I made a big 7-gallon batch, and I used the maximum dosage, and it's down to 0, and it's still too sweet. And I added some oak, and that helped it out quite a bit. And then I was talking to Carvin a couple of days ago, and he said it's like with all of these things, over time they kind of fade away some, and he said that over sweetness will start to fade to the back some. So I'm not quite as concerned as I was with it being too sweet. So anyway, that's about all that I know to add here tonight for you guys. If you have more questions or comments, or want to get on and tell us your stuff, then now's the time.
Well, there's a conversation going on about sizers right now in the chat, and might be interesting to take a look at sizers and preferred yeasts, because it's that time of the year,
It is. I personally think a sizer is the hardest mead to make. This is why. I think that...
Well, it's hard to make it without it tasting like old moldy apples, yeah.
Well,
or without losing the honey.
Yeah, or just without it just tasting like apple juice that was fermented, right? I mean, In my mind, I kind of think that cider needs to be like a wheel with several spokes. I think we have to have a bitter part of the apple. And so these are all probably either different additions, or at least to begin with, most of these will probably be a different apple strain. And I live in a fruit desert. We don't have any good fruits hardly here in Colorado. Most of what we get from the stores were picked 2 months before they were ripe, and so they show up here rock hard and they're not ripe, and then all of a sudden, it goes from a rock hard green fruit to a moldy piece of mush the next day, and so we just don't have very good fruit. But well, Vicki, you live in apple country galore, don't you?
Yeah, Western North Carolina's got a lot of apple growing. In fact, I'm going to go down to the farmers market probably around the end of the month, because I'm out the rest of this week, and then I'm out for a week later in the month. But I'm going to go down and get that. I've got a 15-gallon Spidell that desperately wants to be filled with cider and spices. So, and possibly some berries. I'm playing. I haven't decided what this year's cider is going to look like, but I'm going to make a lot of it, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I made a 15-gallon batch with apple cider I'd pressed too. It's a lot of work, but it was worth it.
Yeah. Well, mine will be less work because I just have to pour it in, from the bottle. But
Fair.
And then I'll have a whole bunch of lovely glass bottles that I can use for my 1-gallon batches for the experiments. But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of possibilities for, and I've seen people using everything from, D47 to EC1118 and everything in between for sizers, but I'd like to zero in on, like a couple of ones that would really play to the apples.
Mm-hmm. So I'm actually looking at the cider handbook, the 28 cider handbook.
Oh, you switched books on us, dude. I got the other one up.
Well,
Damn you.
Yeah, all the yeasts that are in your book are also, they're in both books. But the cider book actually, it focuses on making cider itself, and so the different strains that they suggest, or it's a much smaller list than the all of the strains that you have. But I know I was looking at these the other day, and here's some of what I think would make a good. Would be 58W3, BA11, DV10, M2, especially maybe M2 if you wanted to make a real sweet, like an ice wine type cider, a Sauterne. R2 would also work well for that. QA23. And Rhone 4600. Those are all ones that I'm familiar with, and they were highly recommended in the book too. Now each of those will play up a little bit different aspect of the apple presence. Just like we've been talking about, some of these are going to have a suit in aroma. Others will have a suit in mouthfeel, or supporting your different fractions of your apples. And so I guess it's going to boil down to what juice do you have and what honey you're going to add. I wish I could know enough to say, well, if you had this much of Granny Smith and this much of Pippin's, and in other words, I think you need the tart, you need the dry and the bitter, you need the pie flavored apples, if that makes sense, of apple pie apple. Mm-hmm. And then you need a hand eating, with your hand, just eat the damn thing apple. And I think that we need all of those in a certain combination so that we have a well-balanced concert, if you will, of each of the apples kind of making their own note. And therein lies what I think is the hardest part, or the most difficult part about making a good cider, so that you have all of those different things, so it doesn't just taste like, what's that apple juice that
Allen's.
kind of like, yeah, there's another one too. Anyway, most of the ciders I taste, they just taste like they were made with a single apple, and they're really kind of boring. Now,
Yeah.
here are some tannins that I think will work extremely well. One would be the FT Blanc. The FT Blanc Soft, and they have a brand new one that's called Radiance. And we spoke about this just a minute. It says it can help unmask and refine aromas and flavors of your fresh fruit, and is also known to contribute vanilla, coconut, and caramel. And so that might work real well if you're making an apple pie type of a cider. You know, we have some cideries here in town, and quite frankly, I think most of them taste like crap. And I'm like, God, how can you stand drinking them? They're too dry and too tannic and
too
sour or tart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're usually very one-dimensional. Or I've seen a few that were really amazing, but a lot of them are fairly one-dimensional. But Gosha, and I'm sorry if I'm mangling your name, I actually looked up the Cyrillic, says he uses Rhone 4600 in his sizer and loves the FT Blanc Soft.
Who does?
Gosha. That's the, if you look at the chat, which I know you're not looking at the chat right now, he's on the chat.
Oh, yeah, I'm not.
Yeah,
well, so that makes sense, because those are really good choices.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm going to play around with it, because I've always gone kind of the safe route, you know. In fact, my first one, if I remember correctly, and I'd have to get my book out to verify this for sure, but I believe my first one was with Montrachet, which was at the time, 20 some odd years ago, A, one of only like 4 yeasts available, and B, B was, just, I liked it. And, later as my palate developed, and especially once I started learning to judge, I found out that Montrachet has a very distinctive flavor note that it adds to pretty much everything you put it in. And I kind of moved away from it, because I felt, I don't know, I just felt like I didn't really want that one tone that it always adds to everything to come through.
Right. Yeah, I kind of feel like there's maybe 5 or 6 yeasts that I guess a lot of going, I bet this is, CY 3079, just because that has such a distinct fraction to it that I just feel like every time I taste something like that, I think, I bet this guy used this yeast or that. And there's a handful that it'd be interesting to see if I'm full of crap or if I'm, kind of nailing it a little bit. One last thing that both of the books have that I think probably some certainly not going to want to do this. They have what they're called finishing kits, and they're both a tannin kit. One is called a Lux tannin, and I'll read the description. It says the Lux tannins are ultra premium finishing tannins designed to bring out elegance, complexity, and balance in ciders. And they've been highly refined and carefully extracted, so additions may be made as late as 48 hours prior to bottling. Now, what you can buy for $15.25, it says our Lux liquid tannin kits include samples of each of the tannins in the range. Then they go on to name that. It's Radiance, Onyx, and Royal. These kits are a great tool to make the final touches to your cider, and so both of these are kits where you can buy the tannins that you actually will use. I think some are powdered and then some are liquid, but you buy these kits, if you will, and that's what you then use to do a bench trial. So the one with the Lux tannins, those are like the really luxury tannins that you're just kind of doing to add that super special piece at the end. This other one's a much larger kit with a whole lot more tannins to it, and it's actually $91.35. That's what I'm thinking. Probably only people that make a lot of mead and have some money to waste, so to speak, would be interested in that. But rather than putting something in your bottle and then waiting forever to taste it and then go, I wonder how it's going to taste. These kits are designed so that, let's say you've got a glass of mead sitting right on your table right now and you want to know what this particular tannin is going to taste like. You can take these little kits, and the liquids come in little bottles, and then you can use a pipette and you can drip X amount of drops in there, and you can continue to add more and more, and you will then instantly know how much to use right away, and you'll know what it'll taste like once you put those tannins in there and it has a chance to integrate and fold in well with your mead. You'll know what it's going to taste like down the road instead of guessing. And so both of these are little kits that you can play with to figure out right there at the very moment what it's going to taste like, later down the road when these add these additions. And so that'll help you to know, all right, I'm going to put this much in there, and I know that 2 months from now it's going to taste like this. So I think those are super cool too. I mean, in our mead group that we get together here in Denver, we've actually played with some of these tannins, and so it's a great way to. It's kind of like doing the oak tea that I talked about before, of making the different oak teas to have immediately available, so that you can drip those in something, and you know the difference between light toast and heavy toast, and the difference between French and American oak, and they're kind of doing the same thing for these finishing kits for your tannins.
Jim Davis just weighed in on that, and he says with the Scott Labs tannin kits, you need a micro pipetter and tips, anywhere from a $75 to $250 investment. Says they're 1% solutions that you mix in a bench trial of 25, 50, or 100 milliliter samples of product. Bench trial examples instructions are documented on the Scott Lab product TDS pages.
Right. Thanks for that, Jim. Hi, bud.
Earlier on, is it Yosha? Was asking if it would be naive to mix Opti White and Opti Red in the same batch. And they said they actually did this in a buckwheat traditional, but didn't make a control batch to compare it to. He did say that it turned out phenomenal. My feeling on that is, since meads are neither red nor white, why the hell not?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, we don't have to follow any rules, right? I mean, rules were made to be broken, and it's our stuff. We can play like we want to. The only thing so here, just in general, here's a couple things that I like to consider when we're kind of testing things out. It's always good to have a control to compare to. Otherwise, you kind of forget, or you don't really know exactly how much different it is without. And so you're kind of losing track of what's really going on because you don't have a control to go back and compare to. And then, as I mentioned the other night, it's always good to take whatever additions that you're going to add. Please take them intentionally too far. You don't have to go too far beyond too far. Does that make sense? In other words, if 5 drops of something, you know for sure you've gone too far, then you don't need to continue to go to 10 drops too far. But make sure that you've gone beyond where you know for sure you should have stopped, because that's going to teach you very much what something is when it's too much. And that then will give you kind of a hedge or a fence that as you get closer to being too much, you're going to know that, because you've already tasted what too much is. If you've never gone too much, you say, oh, well, that's good, let's stop there. Well, how do you know that the next little drop is even better? And so that's my point. Any of these additions that you're going to add them and take them too far so that you then have a good idea. And that's going to actually help for those of you guys that are judges or are going to become judges. If you know what too much of something is and you're tasting a brand new mead and it goes, everybody's going, what's that? You go, oh, I know. I think I already have taken the FT Blanc too far, and I know what that tastes like, or I know what too much malic acid tastes like, or So take everything that you do a little bit too far, and that'll help to better establish your parameters.
Also, a good one is to see what too much is like after aging, too, because you never know exactly what effect aging is going to have on a particular flaw that you've managed to create. Like, I've got one ultra bitter high bush cranberry mead that I made a long time ago that is still dropping out tannins and getting closer and closer to being drinkable.
Yeah, wow.
And the Chateau plywood batch that I made when I learned that you don't use a 5-gallon batch worth of oak chips when you only diluted it out to 3 gallons, that actually aged out to really, really nice. But it was like licking a lumber store when I first bottled it. But it did age out nice.
Yeah, and as you learn more about doing that, then you're going to actually probably add more than. And I tell people when they're playing with oak, it's gonna fade back. Anything.
Yeah,
I made
oak, spices, all of these things.
The first time I made a sizer, I bought some mulling spices from Whole Foods. I had no idea. I probably put in a cup of mulling spices in a 3-gallon batch, and I'll bet there were 45 cloves in there.
I bet that was pretty rough for the first year or two.
And it was clover honey too, and so I named it Clover. I named it Clover Dose.
Clover Dose. That's awesome.
Good name. I did that one of my early spiced meads, and yeah, I love cloves, so I went way overboard with them. And it's fun to have a mead that makes your lips and throat go numb. So when you think about it, if you've got a cough or, if you're just sore tooth or,
yes, they're very medicinal.
Yeah, Clover Dose would be the perfect thing.
Right. Well, that was back when I read all the time and hadn't had any real life experience. Everybody says don't throw anything away. Well, that was certainly something that I would have thrown away had I not read that over and over a million times. And I actually put it away, and about 8 months later, it was just absolutely fabulous. And so I learned then, wow, some of these things will really fall far back over time. This Russian cherry that I was drinking earlier, I dry hopped it with some Hallertau hops, and I sent a bottle to a guy right after I made it. And he says, man, this tastes like you're drinking a Christmas tree. Because the hops are so strong, but now, once those have a chance to fall back, it integrates quite nicely, and it doesn't taste at all like a Christmas tree once it's integrated.
Yeah, that's I'm one of those people that I have a hard enough time throwing things away, dumping a mead, unless it's hideous. I mean, just round the bend bad. I won't throw it away. I'll try to blend it with something, and see what I can get. Yeah, because sometimes I get good. One of my favorite meads was a blend of a strawberry that went too dry and orange blossom that didn't go dry enough. It died,
Yeah. I don't always hit exactly what I'm aiming for, but usually even my stuff that's, not what I was looking for, it's still pretty good meat, and then I can almost always turn it into something that's, not super magical, but it's pretty dang good. There was a meat I made a while back that it never came around, and I was disappointed in it, but it wasn't horrible. But I thought, here's an idea. And so I took it to our group and gave everybody a half gallon to take home. And I said, everybody just go take this home and do whatever you want to do to try to rescue it and bring it back, later. And we did that. And I was quite surprised. The rest that I didn't give out, I just put it away. And actually, after it aged, and this is something I've learned too, since I've been able to understand and ferment with good science, almost everything tastes, very nice right out of the fermenter before it's even clear, because it's not full of flaws. But some of these things, I'm quite surprised how much better they get even I mean, I think this one thing might have taken a year. Yeah, I had one. I've told you before about the Sir Digby recipe that I made, Queen Anne's Royal Meth, is it's called. Those are hard because they don't tell you exactly what some of the ingredients are, so you have to study history to find out what plant they're talking about, and then they had different measuring metrics than we use, like a scotch or a pinch, and I don't remember even what those names were, but I was just guessing on the amounts, and it ended up being way medicinal. And after about 2 years, I finally decided to dilute it with another traditional, and so I did that, but I kept a little bit of the original aside just for the hell of it. And I'll be damned if after a little while later, the stuff that I thought was way too powerful and overbearing ended up being the most complex and mysterious thing I've ever had in my mouth, and it was just fabulous. And I ruined it because most of it because I diluted it, and I was quite surprised that probably took 3 years to do what it did eventually, and it wasn't at all full of flaws. It just took that long for all those things to integrate like they did.
Yeah, the horrible herbal one that I did was like that, 3 years. But when it finally got around to integrating, it was really good. I don't know that I'm going to do it again because I don't feel like waiting that long. But yeah, I totally hear you. It's, I think some of them just, aren't supposed to be drinkable maybe right away.
Yeah, maybe not. I mean, certainly some. I've actually had some that taste better brand new, green, so to speak, than what they do after they've aged for a year.
Well, yeah, I had that conversation with John Bryans at Monroe in Ontario, and I had picked up some bottles of his Melomel, and I stashed them, and I brought them back with me, and I got them at the Mazer Cup, and I brought them back with me the next year at the next Mazer Cup, and I'm like, John, you gave me these last year, so I brought them back. We're gonna drink them, and he's like, dude, you should have drank those already. He says they're gonna be terrible, and I'm like, what do you mean? And he says they're not designed to be aged. You're supposed to buy them and drink them. And I was like, oh, well, let's see what happened. Oh yeah, they were bad because these were medal winning meads. I mean, they took medals at the Mazer, so they're good meads, but they're not designed to be drunk. Right. You buy them, you drink them. That's what they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
Knowing that is important though, because some of us don't drink very fast.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. I mean, I've got more mead than I could ever possibly drink. I take cases of it with me when I go places to share. And I just pray that, 9 times out of 10, they're all good, because I only bring home meads that I've already tasted that I know are good. But,
right.
But every once in a while, I'll get one that just was not designed to be stashed.
Well, I've had a couple of when I was making wines. Like, I made a kiwi wine that was fantastic when I first bottled it, but after about 6 months of aging, it's like, where did it go? What happened to my lovely wine? And that's only 6 months, so it really wasn't a whole lot of age on it, but it lost that lovely fresh taste that it had. So next time, and I tried a repeat of it, and the same thing happened. So I'm kind of the mind that if I'm going to do kiwi wine again, it's going to be I'm going to make a hydromel or something out of it, make something quickly quaffable out of it so that it doesn't sit around.
Yeah.
Well, my first thought is how much you manage your SO2 with that one. Probably not at all, right?
Funny enough, I actually didn't manage the first one, and the second one I did, and the second batch was worse.
Oh, huh.
So I don't really know what it is with that one.
Yeah.
Or at least I may not have managed the second batch well because I have no testing equipment, but I think I did actually stabilize that batch. But that one actually oxidized a little bit. Now, granted, these were wines, not meads. I haven't actually tried a kiwi mead, but I come into this from a winemaking background rather than a beer or mead making. So that's that's my approach, which is why I don't tend to do anything in secondary, because if I were making a wine, it has to go in primary, otherwise I'm fermenting sugar water.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking maybe we need to get see if I can lure Ken back on the show to talk about aging meads and best practices kind of thing.
To get who back on?
Ken Schramm.
Oh, yeah. Well, if we don't have any other miscellaneous stuff, I think it's time for me to get off of here so I can go finish getting ready to go fly fishing tomorrow.
To go fishing, yeah, I hear you. Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it. Yeah,
Sure.
we haven't got any more questions coming in, so you're safe.
All right. Well, good night, everybody. Meet on. And good night, all.
Have fun
Night,
fishing,
Ryan.
man.
No, Ryan.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Now I got my reading cut out for me. The yeast handbook, the cider handbook.
Oh yeah.
Probably time to go back and reread the complete mead maker again. It's been a few years, just.
Yeah, I got about half my wine books are in a backpack, and the other half are in the briefcase that I brought to the Mazer Cup. So I gotta go through all of those again and figure out what else I'm gonna add to this. I might end up printing out the yeast handbook or the cider handbook too.
Yeah.
Because as much as computers save paper, I don't like reading on the screen.
I'll probably download it to my tablet, so I've got it like handy like a book. But yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. I don't have a printer that can handle that. My printer's just limping along right now, and I haven't bought a new one yet. So. Alrighty, so upcoming events. October 4th, 2 days from now, Moore Artisan Meads is having country line dancing with Debbie Rich. That sounds like it'd be fun. I haven't been line dancing in ages. October 6th, Be Well Mead and Cider is having their anniversary party. These guys are up in northern Michigan. Good mead, great cider. Definitely well worth the visit if you're up that way. October 14th,
Nice.
Boss Meadery is doing science and mead tastings at the Wisconsin Science Festival. What a cool combination.
No kidding.
Yeah, and so all you STEM geeks, get in there and check it out. They're in Wisconsin. October 27th, the Texas Mead Association is having their Texas Mead Fest. This is a fun event. They're down in South Central Texas, I believe, and that should be pretty fun. These links are all on the episode page, so you can just click your way through to the events. Also on October 27th, Brimminghorn Meadery in Delaware is having a Fight Like a Viking breast cancer benefit. There's going to be a concert, there's going to be mead tasting, probably food trucks, all kind of fun stuff. Definitely worth a look.
Nice.
Yeah, and of course, Brimminghorn Mead.
Yeah.
Totally. So, but and then November 17th, Boss Meadery again. They're having their progressive dinner, and that's a ticketed event. So I'm putting it out there so people have time to get to it. But and that's all I've got. If you got an event you'd like us to mention on Got Mead Live, send us an email at gotmeadlive@gotmead.com and tell us about it. We'll put it on the show for you. And that's all
Hamish
I got.
just sent a link. Hamish just sent a link. I'm trying to click on it, but my computer's being a dink.
We've got the 2018 Nelson Wine Show coming up.
Oh, yeah.
On
Okay, hang on. I got
the
the
11th
date
of
coming
November.
up here. 11th of November? Okay.
Yeah. So entries are already open. I can't remember if they're still open or not. 13th of October is the last date for entry forms. So that's coming up in the next 10 days. So anybody wanting to enter the show, please do, and get that done by the 13th of October. And anybody wanting to come along and taste a whole heap of meads and wines, of course, come along on the 11th of November to the Veneto Club in Bulleen, Victoria.
Okay, and if you want to find out more, that's www.amateurwine.org.au.
That's correct.
So that's all I got for tonight. What about you guys?
That's all I got.
All right. Well, then I'm going to get off so I can finish packing for my trip up to go play with black powder cannons the rest of this week. And real cannons and real cannonballs doesn't get any better than that.
That's so awesome.
And me.
Okay, so what have we got upcoming? What have we got upcoming for the show?
It's a really good question. Hang on, and let me pull up the sheet. Usually I put it on the show page, but I forgot this time, so bear with me just a second.
You will still be faster than me trying to locate and open it. So yes, I will definitely bear with you.
Assuming I can get
My computer's being such a twit.
Yeah. Assuming I can get
Can't even
Google
play a
Drive
video
to just
today.
open the flipping page. You know, it's like, hello, open the page.
Do 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 do.
What is your favorite color?
Blue, no red. Ah!
Oh yeah, today, right now, of course, Google Drive chooses to be a bitch.
Okay, I hate computers.
She's
Come on,
thumbing
carry
her
on now,
nose
guys.
at me. I believe next week we've got Carvin.
Okay.
If I can get Google to open the flipping page. Any other time it comes right the heck up, you know? When I don't need it to. Come on! Load your page, load your page. Oh, are you kidding me? Seriously?
I'm sorry I had to ask the hard question.
Yeah, you had to. No, I should have already had it in the show notes, and I was running around in 12 directions all day today, and just kind of blew it off. Alrighty then. Next week, Carvin Wilson on traditionals. So this will be something interesting. And then we'll have a bonus episode with Matus. And my page just like reloaded itself and scrolled down. It's like, seriously?
Drive does that to me.
Yeah,
Matus
Matus from
it's one of those let it load 5 minutes and then come back to it things.
Yeah.
Stupid
And we have a special bonus. It'll be a recorded segment that'll come on that we'll just post on after Carvin's on. Matus Blasic, and I'm mangling your name. I'm sorry. Who is heading up the European Mead Makers Conference in Poland next month. And he's going to come on and talk about that. So, for anybody that is in Europe or going to be in Europe, this is going to be a good thing. So he's going to come on. And then the week after that, we've got Michael Jordan. He's the guy that makes the weed mead out in Wyoming. And he spoke at the 2017 AMMA conference. And after that, I'm gone for a week because I'm going to run away to Disney for an anniversary trip. So, and we've got some other people that I'm trying to line up for the last 5 spots before we get to December and we take our month off. One of them is going to be Pete Bakulich. I'm just waiting for him to confirm a date for me. And he's going to talk about putting together a competition, which should be interesting to a lot of people. We need more mead comps. So, but
yeah, and I suppose the more people who know what they're doing with one, the better.
Yeah.
So I know in the pouring room at the Mazer Cup just runs like a well-oiled machine. It's amazing.
Yeah, well, that took a few years to work out the
But
game.
yeah, I'm sure that took years and years to work that out, and
But
it's an amazing system.
Yeah, they've established a routine that can be duplicated in terms of how things can be done to make it work. And so that's why I think Pete's a really good choice to come in and talk about how to start putting one together, because he can help people avoid some of the mistakes that we made back when we started this whole thing. And yeah, so that I think that'll be a good show. And I'm sure we can lure him into talking about mead making too.
Of course.
Yeah. So that said, hope you guys will tune in next week to hear Carvin and chime in with questions and stuff. Be thinking about this. Here's your opportunity to quiz Carvin on his ideas about traditionals. Man makes them a pretty damned amazing mead, so it's well worth doing. So that said, we'll let you guys go back to your lives, and Have a good one. We'll
Oh
see
my
you
God,
next
actually
week.
end on time.
Oh,
How did that
yeah.
happen?
Oh my God.
Purely
Really
amazing. I
good.
didn't even have to push.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.